now. Oh well. So anyway, in this series, we've been talking about the fact that crap can happen in a life that may seem blessed on the outside. Now, a person may look like their life is in order, but they could be dealing with a personal, private pain that you have no idea about. But in thinking about this series, there were two questions that kind of drove my thinking. There was a question, what about the people whose lives look like they're all together, but they might not be? But then on the other hand, there was a question with, what about the people who are trying to do the right thing? Because we have a cultural narrative that says, now if you have any years under your belt, you know that this is not true, but we have a cultural narrative that says that if you do the right thing, then bad things will not happen to you. But what happens when you set out to do the right thing, perhaps even the moral thing, and when you set out to do that, then crap happens? What then? What happens when you see a need and you set out to do something to make a difference and crap happens in the middle of your efforts to bring about some good? What happens when you move to action because you see that you can make a difference and instead of good things happening, bad things happen and you experience tremendous opposition to your work? As I said, if you've lived long enough, you come to understand that crap can happen when you set out to do good. You understand that sometimes on your road to make a difference in a life or in a particular situation that you may feel activated about, you can experience so much crap from people that, for one reason or another, do not want you to succeed. There will always be naysayers. There will always be people that ridicule you, that come against you, that declare your work as a failure from the start, and people will actively resist you. And you know, the funny thing, in Canada, because everyone is super polite, it took me a while to know when someone was against me. Because everyone's super nice here. Everyone wears a coat of politeness. And so, when you come up against personal opposition, it is usually cloaked in Canadian niceness. And when I finally understood what was going on in a certain specific situation I'm thinking about right now, it really kind of took me by surprise. Because up to this point, I'd been like, Canadian people are wonderful, I love this country, everyone is so nice. And so it was like, what? Why are they trying so hard to stop this good thing that I'm trying to do? How could they be working against it? It was shocking, frankly. And if I'm being honest, every time that I've tried to do something and someone has come up against me, I don't think that I fully recovered from those. Those ones, they hit you really hard, don't they? When you've been trying to do something good and someone stands in your way and blocks it, it's very hard. In the Bible, there's a fascinating story about Nehemiah. And he was a Jew that had been born in the Persian Empire. And Persia stretched from present-day Iran and Iraq all the way to Jordan, Syria, and Israel. And this morning, as I was going through this, I was like, oh, I should make a slide to show you how big the Persian Empire was, and I completely forgot. So just Google it at some point during this week, or those of you that are watching online, Google it and see how big this Persian Empire was. It was huge. And the Jews were first carried off into captivity by a guy called Nebuchadnezzar. We actually heard about Nebuchadnezzar in the part one of this series when we talked about Daniel, because Daniel was in the first group of captives that were carried off from Israel. And they stayed here for hundreds of years. And over the years in the Persian Empire in captivity, a few of them were allowed by Emperor Cyrus, I believe, to return and resettle their area. But many, very many of them stayed in Persia. In fact, to this day, until recently with all the fighting in the Middle East, especially in pockets of Syria and northern Iraq, there were groups of Israelite settlements that lived there and that could trace their ancestry all the way back to 400 years before Jesus. So anyway, I digress. The story of Nehemiah starts out with Nehemiah as the cupbearer of the king. And the cupbearer was like a taste tester for the king. Kings apparently regularly got poisoned through their food, so they had someone taste their food before they ate it, and if he died, then you would know the food was poisoned. If he didn't die, then it was safe for the king to eat his food. And it was actually considered to be a position of honor because you were defending the king. You were one of the people that were critical to his survival. And during his tenure as the cupbearer, Nehemiah found out about the situation in Israel. Apparently, the resettlement program that Cyrus had sent the Jews to do had not gone well, and the city was still in ruins. And even though Nehemiah had never been to Israel because he was born in captivity, somehow his heart was moved so much about these people who he did not know, who he had never met, and it troubled him so much that it affected his countenance. It made him downcast. It affected the way he looked and appeared. And the king noticed that his cupbearer was preoccupied and asked him about it. And to his credit, Nehemiah spoke up, and he asked for permission to go to Israel to see what could be done. And after a conversation with the king, he was released to go to Israel and supervise the rebuilding of the city and the temple within. But immediately he arrived in Israel, he ran into two men, Sanballat, who was a Horonite, and Tobiah, who was an Ammonite. And these men were not Israelites, and they opposed him, and they ridiculed him, and eventually moved to threatening him. And they made his life miserable for the whole duration of his stay. Throughout the whole book of Nehemiah, these two men are mentioned as troublemakers. And my personal opinion is that these people were vultures. I think they were preying on the situation. They were taking advantage of the Israelites and the fact that their situation was in ruins. They preferred, this is my opinion, I think they preferred that the Israelites remain in their state than have any kind of rebuilding happen. And the more that I've thought about it, and about people kind of opposing you when you try to do something good, I think that it comes from that place that they want things to stay the same because it is of some advantage to them. They want things to stay the same because it is of some advantage to them, and that's why they oppose you when you're trying to do good. Now, sometimes people oppose you because they don't like change. But generally, if they understand that the change that you're trying to make is for their good, they will accept the change. But the people who know that the change is for good and still resist it, I think that they have an ulterior motive. And I think their ulterior motive is they want things to remain the same because perhaps they're taking advantage of their situation. But Nehemiah, he persisted. He put his head down, planned. He used a lot of cunning, a whole lot of grit. And he mobilizes his people with the help of his buddy Ezra. Ezra was a prophet, and there's a whole other book of the Bible called Ezra that kind of tells you the flip side of the coin of Nehemiah's story. And he leads these people to do something that they had failed to do for many years prior to his arrival. They rebuilt the city. They rebuilt the walls. But as their work went on, Sanballat and Tobiah moved from being just naysayers to actually threatening violence. Let's read about it. Nehemiah 4. We're going to read the whole chapter of Nehemiah 4. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he exploded in anger, vilifying the Jews. In the company of his Samaritan cronies and military, he let loose. What are these miserable Jews doing? Do they think they can get everything back to normal overnight, make building stones out of make-believe? At his side, Tobiah, the Ammonite, jumped in and said, "That's right. What do they think they're building? Why, if a fox climbed that wall, it would fall to pieces under his weight." Verse 4, Nehemiah prayed, "Oh, listen to us, dear God. We're so despised. Boomerang their ridicule on their heads. Have their enemies cart them off as war trophies to a land of no return. Don't forgive their iniquity. Don't wipe away their sin. They've insulted the builders." What a prayer, right? We kept at it, rebuilding and repairing the wall. The whole wall was soon joined together halfway to its intended height because the people had a heart for the work. When Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairs of Jerusalem were going so well that the breaks in the wall were being fixed, they were absolutely furious. They put their heads together and decided to fight against Jerusalem and create as much trouble as they could. We countered with prayer to our God and set a round-the-clock guard against them. But soon the word was going out around in Judah, the builders are pooped. The rubbish piles up. We're in over our heads. We can't build this wall. And all this time our enemies were saying, they won't know what hit them. Before they know it, we'll be at their throats, killing them left and right. That'll put a stop to the work. The Jews who were their neighbors kept reporting, they have us surrounded. They're going to attack. If we heard it once, we heard it 10 times. So I stationed armed guards at the most vulnerable places of the wall and assigned people by families with their swords, lances, and bows. After looking things over, I stood up and spoke to the nobles, officials, and everyone else. Don't be afraid of them. Put your minds on the master, great and awesome, and then fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Our enemies learned that we knew all about their plan and that God had frustrated it. And we went back to the wall and went to work. From then on, half of my young men worked while the other half stood guard with lances, shields, bows, and mail armor. Military officers served as backup for everyone in Judah who was at work rebuilding the wall. The common laborers held a tool in one hand and a spear in the other. Each of the builders had a sword strapped to his side as he worked. I kept the trumpeter at my side to sound the alert. Verse 19. Then I spoke to the nobles and the officials and everyone else. There's a lot of work going on. And we're spread out all along the wall, separated from each other. So when you hear the trumpet call, join us there. Our God will fight for us. And so we kept working from first light until the stars came out, half of us holding lances. I also instructed the people, each person and his helper is to stay inside Jerusalem, guards by night and workmen by day. We all slept in our clothes. That must have been really stinky. I, my brothers, my workmen, and the guards backing me up, and each one kept his spear in his hand, even when getting water. Wow. Nehemiah's story is important for us to consider because it represents the final thought that I have for this series. What do you do when crap happens right in the middle of you trying to do something good? What do you do when faced with personal opposition right in the middle of trying to make someone's life better? What do you do when people rise up in opposition to an idea that you are pursuing that is going to make the situation better? What do you do? People always say that personal opposition is a sign that you are doing something right, but they always throw out that platitude without understanding the gravity of what it means to come up against personal opposition. It's very difficult to keep focused or motivated when there are people actively trying to destroy your work or bring your reputation into ruin or even physically harm you. It's very difficult to keep focused. And in Nehemiah's case, this guy is pretty awesome. Against all odds, he kept his cool for many years. And he was able to be instrumental in rebuilding the city of his ancestors. And so, what can we learn from him? I think the first thing that we can learn is that he prayed. You can see it in verse 4 and 5. Nehemiah prayed, "Oh, listen to us, dear God. We're so despised. Boomerang their ridicule on their heads." At the end of verse 7 to 8, he said, they put their heads together and decided to fight against us and create as much trouble. But we countered with prayer to our God and set around the clock guard to guard. They prayed, they countered with prayer. You see, Nehemiah was a person that understood that his mission was not his own. He understood that as much as his heart had been reactivated about the Israelite resettlers, in truth, his response was a mirror of God's response. I think that we need to understand this at a fundamental level. Every time you hear about something and your heart breaks, every time you hear about something and you go, I need to do something about this situation, understand that that is God's response as well. Because we are created in his image. And so our responses to injustice in this world mirror God's response. And as such, we get to be God's solution in this world. We get to be a part of transforming this world. We get to be his hands and his feet and see what it is like to be on the front lines, bringing help to people that desperately need it. So every time that we face personal attack, personal opposition, we have to remember this. Our mission is God's mission. Our passion is God's passion. So instead of trying to navigate it on your own, pray, 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 pray. Nehemiah's story, he prays a lot. He prayed before he spoke to the king. He prayed before he spoke to the people. He prayed when he faced personal opposition. He prayed when he faced death threats. He prayed. We need to pray. The second lesson we need to learn, that we could learn, is that he kept on going. It's a very simple lesson, but it is a meaningful lesson. He kept on going. Do you see it in verse 6? We kept at it, repairing and rebuilding the wall. This whole wall was soon joined together and halfway to its intended height because people had a heart for the work. They kept on going. The goal of the people who oppose you is simple. Just to get you to stop what you're doing. They want things to stay the way they are. And you know what? In our culture where we're very averse to conflict, we avoid it at all costs. All this does is that it keeps us from doing the things that we're inspired to do in the first place, because we're trying so hard to avoid conflict. There is good conflict and there is bad conflict. But however, if we see our convictions as aligned with God's ideas, then we start to see the roads that we are on as God roads. When we understand that we're activated to do things because it is God's imprint in us that is activated, then we can keep going because God is on our side. On the road to do the right thing, crap will happen to you, but if you pray and remember that God is on your side, you will find the strength to keep on going. The third lesson that we can learn from Nehemiah is that he did not go it alone. He prayed, he kept on going, but he did not go it alone. He went with other people. Verse 13 and 14. So I stationed guards at the most vulnerable places. I assigned people by families with their swords and lances and bows. After looking all things, I spoke up to the nobles and officials and everyone else. Don't be afraid of them. Put your minds on the master, great and awesome, and then fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. This whole story of Nehemiah is a story of a leader activating people to work together to do something that they had failed to do because they were so splintered and so downtrodden. And you know, when you get activated about something, usually because you think that you're the only person who sees the need, it's so easy to go alone. It's so easy to get touched by a move of other people. Sorry, is there someone back there? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes, we've been robbed before, so I'm super vigilant. Yes, where was I? It's so easy to go it alone when you're activated about something. I don't know if you guys know this. I just found this out this week. I was listening to someone else speaking, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. So a horse on its own, it can pull several hundred pounds. But when you have two horses together, they don't just pull double their weight. They pull like, they don't just pull double the amount that one horse can pull. They pull like a lot more. They can pull like 6,000 pounds. The certain horses, the big horses that pull carts and whatever, if you put them together, like some have been recorded pulling like 20,000 pounds. It's really incredible. When they're working together, the strength gets compounded. And it's interesting, it's a principle that goes all throughout creation, that when we work together, our strength gets compounded. When we do something together, when we pull our efforts, we get so much more done alone. We get so much more done than when we're alone. And this is so important when crap happens in your life. Because if you're walking alone, you may not be able to take the strain. But if you find other people that are like you and that want the same things and you pull together, you will have a bigger impact. You will go much further. An interesting phenomenon is happening among my Christian friends. They're choosing to remove themselves from fellowship with other believers. Most of the people who choose to remove themselves from fellowship with other believers would cite a grievance of one kind or another. And I can honestly say that if a Christian isolates themselves from other Christians, they don't stay close to God. If you willfully isolate yourself from other Christians, your relationship with God suffers. And people go, don't judge, don't whatever. You can't see into the hearts of men. Yes, I can't. But there is something interesting that Jesus says. He says, this is how you will know that people are my followers. You will know them by their fruit. You will know them by their love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, mercy, grace, compassion. These are the markers of the people that follow me. And when people remove themselves from fellowship with other believers, usually what you will find is not a fruit of love and joy and compassion and grace and mercy. You'll find fruit of resentment and fear and condemnation and judgment. And all of these things, the more that you sit in them, they create separation between you and God. And so there is something that happens when you choose to walk with other people that share your faith. When you join together with groups that are trying to make a difference in the area of your compassion, it stops being a theoretical exercise and it becomes something that is real and tangible and full of potential and much harder to stop. That way, when crap happens, there is a lesser chance of getting derailed. Just think about your life. I was thinking about this week. How many things have I started and failed to finish because I was walking alone? Individualism is the great deception of our culture. And in many ways, it robs us of our potential. And moreover, it is directly against the teaching of Scripture. Peter, the great apostle of Christ, could not have changed the world alone. John could not have changed the world alone. Paul could not have changed the world alone. James could not have changed the world alone. Even the women mentioned in the New Testament scriptures, Priscilla, Phoebe, Junia, these women could not have changed the world alone. But when these men and women pulled together, they planted a movement that could not be stopped. They started something that changed history. And so this afternoon, I want to leave this challenge with you. When you're going through the stuff that life throws at you, when the worst happens, when you're facing personal opposition, when bad things happen to you on the road to change your life or the life of someone you care about, here's what you should remember. Pray, keep on going, and don't go it alone. Amen.